Really excited, and I think you will be too, to talk to our special surprise guest this week. It is Dr. Jacinta Jimenez, and she is the new author of a book called The Burnout Fix: Overcome Overwhelm, Beat Busy, and Sustain Success in the New World of Work. She's also a Stanford-trained psychologist. My dad's a psychologist, so we have that in common. I'm interested to get her thoughts on that topic. And she also ran coaching at BetterUp, so she knows some folks at Integrate already. So we're so happy and grateful. Dr. J, I know you go by that. Thanks for stopping by the Integrate Town Hall.
Thanks. I am so excited to be here. And I didn't know that you had a psychologist in the family, so that's even more exciting. Yeah, really excited to be here. And Deb, who I know from BetterUp, has just said wonderful things about Integrate and you and everyone else at the company. So even more excited to be here.
Thank you. Let's start with your personal story of burnout, and maybe you could share some stories from that and really what led you to wanting to write this book.
Yeah, I definitely wrote it from a place of, yes, I'm a psychologist. I've studied peak performance and resilience, but I've also been there. And so wanted to go to make the point that burnout can happen to anyone. Even a psychologist here. And I've had 2 burnout episodes, but the first one I'll talk about is when I started off in my career, I didn't even know I was going to be a psychologist. I thought I was going to be a dancer, and I wanted to be a professional dancer. I saw Martha Graham. I don't know if you've seen Steve Jobs' Think Different posters, but one of the people on there is Martha Graham. And I wanted to be like Martha Graham because she was in a time when Balanchine and all these male choreographers were there. Here comes 5'1" Martha going, why do we have to dance up here in space? Why can't we be on the ground? Why can't we think differently? And I was like, that's who I want to be like. And so I got to study under Marnie Wood, who was the direct soloist under Martha Graham. And I was loving it, but unfortunately, as things happen in sports and things, I ended up with a broken jaw. Was wired shut in 2 places, but I had a 30th year anniversary role. Yeah, I don't recommend wiring. I saw some people's faces. They're like, oh, not fun. I'm really good at talking like this still. But it was wired shut, and I wouldn't give up my 30th year anniversary role. And I was like, okay, I'm going to keep dancing. But then somehow, I don't know how, my jaw was wired shut. I was not kissing anyone or anything. I end up with mono on top of that. I think it was my body going, you need to slow down. And I still dance. I convinced my doctors, I'm going to keep dancing. I'm going to keep pushing through. But then my brother got sick, like a really serious chronic disease affecting his heart. And I was like, this feels like too much, but I'm a 1st generation college student. My dad was a migrant field laborer from Mexico, grew up without a home, in cars, tents. And so I was like, I don't know, maybe this is what like you're supposed to feel when you're really passionate about something. So I went to a professor, and I remember vividly sitting down in front of him and saying, with my jaw wired shut, going, is this bad? Should I like pause? And he's like, no, like just, as a woman of color, I'm just going to tell you the truth. Like, society's not going to give you breaks. You're going to have to jump more hurdles. You're going to have to be tougher. I'm not going to give you an extension. I'm not going to tell you to stop. And so I think his words came from a really deep place of compassion, trying to tell me like the inequities that women and people of color and underrepresented populations face. But I mistook that for just hustle more, push harder. And so I did. And I just was listening to the outside messages of society telling you like, nope, you're not going to get a break. Just hustle, hustle, hustle. And I did. And I made it to New York. I studied at the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. But arriving home from New York, I pretty much had no passion for dance anymore. And it still gets me a little bit upset today because there was nothing else I wanted to be more than be a dancer. It was like so important. And I was like, how could I go from loving something so passionately, so much to the point where I'm dancing through broken jaws, concussions, you name it. I was like, I'm doing it, to not feeling any passion for it anymore. And I stopped and I stopped dancing. And those moments in between having stopped, I go, oh my God, how uncomfortable is it to pause? And it took me like a few months to get comfortable with the pause and the silence of not just rushing through life. It was pretty amazing. And I ended up deciding to start my whole career over again in psychology, studying peak performance motivation because of this reason. And the reason I still get emotional about it today is that I, as a coach, I've coached some of the top folks in Silicon Valley and all over the world. Too many times I see so many passionate people who really care about what they do, their work, burn out and flounder along the way. And it's so heartbreaking because right now, when we have a social justice movement and a racial justice movement that's so important, when we have climate change, we have all these huge, heavy, important things that we need people to sustain their success, to fight the good fight, to be able to not burn out along the way. So as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this. I'll stop talking because I'm talking a lot, but that's my story of kind of my experience into burnout and not wanting folks to ever have to compromise their passion, that motion doesn't mean meaning.
Well,
Yeah.
first of all, thank you so much for your authenticity and vulnerability, two qualities that I think build great relationships. And this is a safe space. So thank you for speaking openly and passionately
Thank you.
about that. When you transitioned from your passion to being a dancer, I mean, I think transitions in life are difficult and scary, especially when you're really passionate about something. It can be all consuming. It can define you, right? And I experienced that as an athlete. I was a football skier for so long, and I had to transition into something new, and it was scary. I had to climb a new mountain. I had to be a beginner all over again. And everybody goes through these things in life. You don't have to be an athlete to do that. And it sounds like you coach a lot of folks through their passion to make sure they're on the path that is intended to them. But for you, what did that moment in your life teach you, and how did it prepare you to be a better psychologist and coach?
Yeah. Oh, such a beautiful point. And it's so true that we do face transitions. And I think what I learned was that I wasn't starting over all the way again, that I had learned so much about kind of how to practice, how to stretch myself, that I could apply what I had learned to dance, not as intensely. I also learned that there's a dark side to flow and all kinds of other things. But really learning that I knew I had tools, that there's so many tools that we have in our tool belt from all different parts of our lives, from our childhood or from adversity or from different parts that we can channel towards new pursuits or new skill sets, and that it's just about slowly stretching ourselves over time. But I also learned that true performance isn't about how you endure, it's about how you recharge.
Yeah.
It really comes down to how you recharge.
I was at I believe it was an Olympic summit. They do it every year and they bring in all these great speakers. And something that stuck out with me a few years ago was a speaker that came in and said something to the extent of telling people to just follow their passions is the wrong advice, because there was a study done, I think it was by HBS, but most people don't actually know what their passion is, and they often need some help leading to what is your passion. So just saying like, hey, you should live a life where you just follow your passions, where it was like 20% of people actually know what their true passion is. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think and also passion is great, but it's only one piece of the picture. It's only one part of the picture. If we just follow our passion, or we just try to do something without counterbalancing it with, self-care, or what does that mean, or how does that realistically show up in our lives? It can really, I liken it to, because I like adventure sports and things, is like going in and doing like some kind of crazy terrain, like skiing or something without a helmet on or something. I'm passionate about this, but like letting go of all these kind of resilience buffers we need. And it's the same thing with happiness. A lot of people go, I want to be happy. And I always encourage them, I love happiness, but sometimes hard things aren't happy, or life isn't always happy. And we can have those down things. But meaning is something we can align ourselves with. Meaning is something we can make. And there's never an we can always have meaning, but we can't always have a happiness destination where we're always going to, I mean, look at 2020, right? Like we're never always going to feel great all the time, but meaning is something we can always have and endure. And I think meaning tied with passion and resilience is the ultimate combo.
Seems like the mathematical formula for happiness, right? Is really those factors in meaning. So 2020 has happened. It's changed all of our lives. What are some of the challenging things that you're seeing that this year and what it has been in store for us is creating for all of us? Because we're all feeling a level of burnout. We're all feeling a new normal. We're all feeling maybe emotions that we haven't felt before. But from all the folks that you're coaching and talking to, like what stands out to you about this year, and how should we think about navigating them?
Oh man, so many thoughts come up when you're talking about this year. Like, oh, I'm feeling all the things too. The big thing that stood out to me as a psychologist is how much we are not wired to tolerate uncertainty. Like evolutionarily speaking, it really benefits us not to tolerate uncertainty, because if we're like out, walking around in nature, and we're not paying attention to the weather patterns or that thing that's going to creep out behind us, that's going to put us in a bad shape. So it made sense, but now, even though we've been launched into this new world, we still have that in our DNA. And actually, a study found that if you ask someone, would you rather have a shock now or possibly have a shock later in the day, may or may not happen, most people pick option one, shock me now.
Get it out of the way, right?
With.
Yeah.
That's how much we hate uncertainty. And it also shows me in to balance out that is just how much we need to make sure to figure out what we can have in our control. And it's what Julian Rotter, a psychologist, has deemed an internal locus of control. So what are the things like our mindsets, our boundaries, our behaviors, those things that can keep us grounded and stable while the world and the world of work and everything else spins around us, so that we have some kind of certainty. If we can have those pieces, we can feel a lot more certain. Yeah, and I'll stop there. I have another thought, but I'm like, I'll just stop for a second.
So we should try to think about our lives holistically, like 300, not just work, but like, and in your advice and counsel is like, try to remove as much uncertainty as possible, especially given a year where there's more uncertainty than maybe normal. Is that right?
Yes, totally right. Exactly right. And another piece of that certainty that I think we forget, you probably have been hearing a lot on news and TV and articles like resilience and how to cope and mindfulness. And I love these ideas of one-off coping mechanisms and things, but I think at the end of the day this year, what really brings to me is that we need to figure out how to have unity and diversity, in that a key resilience factor is social wellness, social connectedness, belonging, inclusion, well-being, and we are stronger together. And we can't solve these kind of big things by just doing one-off coping mechanisms, that if we can lean into each other, connection is so wired we're wired. That's how we survived as tribes for centuries. When we were faced with uncertainty or hardships, we band together. And so that's my hope, that coming out of this year, it's shaking up things and that there's some change around really looking at how we connect as social beings.
I couldn't agree more. And I think even the most extreme introverts at Integrate are thriving, so are wanting that connection that they typically don't have. I'm on the Myers-Briggs, I'm an ambivert. Okay, so like I'm an E and an I, in the sense that when I want to recharge, I do shut the door, but at the same time I can live in an E world. But I really miss seeing our team. I miss going to Arizona. I miss going to Boston. I miss the UK team. We don't get to see each other. And, maybe when March hit, we're like, hey, the back half of this year is going to be really busy. And we were talking about it being potentially the biggest event season, marketing event season ever. And it's not, and we're not really, nobody knows, is it the vaccine that needs to come out? Like at what point can we start seeing each other? We had an offsite scheduled, a senior leadership team offsite scheduled recently, and we just canceled it.
Yeah.
And, And so I think we're all, excited to whatever degree to be able to see, our each other and our friends, and that human connection piece just seems so important and further highlighted this year.
Totally. And it is so surreal, the amount of uncertainty. Like even when you are hit with a thing that throws you off in life, usually there's like a beginning, a middle, and end. It's going to probably end. But this is just like beyond the beyond in terms of like everything's just so different.
So
different.
what else can we do as employees, as managers, to buffer against this burnout, especially in this Zoom-based world? You talked about certainty, so trying to find as much certainty and removing that ambiguity as much as possible. What are some other things that we could think about doing to help guard against burnout?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the biggest one, the research shows, is psychological detachment. So being able to figure out how, this is easier said than done, how to actually turn off your mind about work. Because even if we schedule, they've even found like you go on vacation, you're still, a lot of people, 48% of Americans think that vacation is not even worth it anymore because they're thinking about work on vacation, which is really heartbreaking for me because I'm like, oh my God, our minds need to recover. Um, there's a reason why nature goes dormant in the winter, why bears hibernate, why our muscles will break down if we overtrain them. We need to have that rest. And a big one is psychological detachment. So even if some people schedule their days exactly the same, if one person, and they get a lot of break time in there, if they're still thinking about work or the stress that's going on in the world, election, we have a lot to think about, so it's easier said than done. If we can psychologically detach and find ways to be really thinking about something else, we're going to give ourselves a break. Our brains turn on this default mode network, and it's really important for our brains, actually. It's overtraining our brains, basically, if we don't.
That resonates a lot. And Sarah mentioned she liked the bear analogy, and Craig gave that a +1. When you're coaching folks, especially the ones who do have a hard time unplugging, who are maybe really passionate about what they're doing, so maybe it's for a good reason, right? Because but is there a formula for taking time off? Like, is it required to be off email? Or, are there steps that we could think about taking if we are going to take some time away that
Yeah.
you would kind of coach us to?
Yeah. I'm all for leisure, bringing back leisure. So when we think of leisure now, it's changed in this 21st century. Like old world leisure, like you think about like in like, let's say, in ancient times, they would have like much more break time, or in Spain, they have after the meal, you sit down, have coffee and drinks. And it was just a different way of leisure. Whereas now we have either compensatory leisure, which is like, I'm going to have 3 glasses of wine, or I'm going to go out dancing, or I'm going to do this intense sport or something else, or spillover leisure, where we just come home, we fall on the couch and we scroll through our feeds, and we're not really getting leisure. And true leisure is psychological replenishment. It's things that fill our soul. And so one of the biggest ones is nature. I like your background. So 20 minutes in nature has been shown to lower your cortisol levels. Because if you think about it on an evolutionary timescale, we've been in nature, 99.9% of the human race has been existing and living in nature. It's only recently that we're not. And with COVID, we're stuck inside. We may get nature time, but really being in nature with your senses. So smell, sight, touch, taste, if it's safe. But 20 minutes can have a significant drop in cortisol level. And then also just doing even mini micro doses. You can go all the way to mega doses of like leisure time, but even just like, hey, you're washing the dishes, focus on the soap. What does that feel like in your hands? What does the temperature of the water feel like? Really getting in and watching your kid play and not worrying about like just being so present and like almost like a screenplay describing kind of how they're playing with the toy. Really trying to be extremely focused on all your senses as much as possible. And nature is a profound way to do that.
Yeah, I really find nature to be restorative. So I have 7 backgrounds on Zoom. They're all nature.
So I need to copy you.
It does offer a sense of calming to what otherwise is a very busy mind inside my head, who I do have a hard time disconnecting from various things. And so, I've played with meditation, and that's hard for me.
Mhm.
Really hard. But things like Headspace, there's some new technology of all things. Like it's kind of like you think, oh, well, get away from the technology, but there's actually some technology that I think is helpful for that. And then you mentioned cortisol, which is the hormone that created when we're stressed, or kind of our fight or flight. So we want to try to stay away from that. I'm just curious, because I'm passionate on the topic of evolutionary psychology and biology. I mean, how much, there's all this kind of age-old question of like nature versus nurture. Like, are you born because of your cellular makeup, or how much of you today is because of like, cultural forces of how you were raised? As a psychologist, like how much do you, well, comment anything on the topic. I don't want to be too specific.
Yeah, no, it's such a great question, because it's exactly how I talk about resilience. Is I use the metaphor of like a seesaw. And on one side, you have adversity or things that are tough that's happened to you in life. Or people that have treated you bad, or just tough stuff. And on the other side of the seesaw are protective factors. Maybe you've built up a mindfulness practice, or you have an outlet, or you have a supportive family, or other things. And in the middle is the fulcrum, like where it balances on, and that's kind of your genetics. And so it's set at a point. It's not a huge point. There's a lot we can do on the other side, the protective side of the seesaw. And your job can be, is to over time build out kind of these core sets of resilience, whether that's through securing support, whether that's leveraging leisure, whether that's managing your energy is something else I encourage people to do. But you can move the fulcrum so that the seesaw ends up tipping on the side of resilience and bouncing back. And that's what we want. And so you have a lot of influence over. There is genetics and there is tough stuff, but I really believe that people who have gone through challenge, actually, I call it a narrative of triumph. That if you can find meaning and lessons from that, oh my God, your seesaw is actually gonna have more stuff on the other side. You can move that kind of baggage from the adversity side over to the other side and tip the seesaw.
Makes so much sense. And, another topic that I find really interesting, it's somewhat related, is functional medicine, which is basically trying to understand not just the symptom, but the disease and why it's happening. And Dr. Hyman, who, if you're interested in the topic, he's a great, for anybody on the team, like his podcast, Dr. Hyman's podcast is amazing. He always talks about like how DNA loads the gun, but our environment pulls the trigger. So it's not like we're destined to whatever it is from a health perspective. Like, yeah, we're all born with different things, but our environment and things we focus on, how we spend our time, how we disconnect, how we restore ourselves is really, really important to the whole story. I'd love to bring in Deb, your buddy Deb. Say hello and ask a question.
Hi. Oh, I'm so happy to see you. And thank you for sharing all of your stories with us. It's so awesome. I'm getting so many different Slacks from people and notes. So thank you for being here. I have a question for you, because it's a topic we've talked a lot about around psychological safety.
Yes.
And as you know, I joined Integrate during this lovely COVID time. So I haven't met many of the people that I spend a lot of time with on Zoom every single day. And one of the things that I think is so important, especially as you're leading new teams, is building that psychological safety into the teams. Can you talk a little bit about, maybe you found this out when you were working on your book, but building psychological safety over this medium in particular, and things to do that would help leaders, as we continue down this path for however long, think about how we can, really drive our teams together so everyone feels like they belong.
Yes. So good to see your face, Deb. I wish I could give you a virtual
hug.
Oh yeah, I couldn't. I mean, psychological safety, I think for any team leader or manager or any team member even, is probably one of the most important gifts you can give your team right now. Because talk about certainty, right? Like if we don't have certainty through psychological safety, what happens is we'll fall into groupthink because our minds need certainty. So we'll just kind of follow along and we end up with an echo chamber of just perspectives instead of diverse perspectives, which we need. And I think the biggest thing we can do is setting up, and I can send this over, I have a worksheet for it if you're all interested, is setting up a kind of team manifesto around psychological safety. How do we ensure that people are able to speak up, share their differences, that dissenting opinions are encouraged, and we can do that in a safe way, because disagreements aren't bad. If they're done in a safe and respectful and kind way, they're actually really, really important. But if you can set up a manifesto where, it's like, these are our team norms, this is what we do, that can make such a difference, a huge difference. Like, how do we meet? When do we meet? When can we speak up? What's going on? And then do retrospectives, like quarterly, like how on your psychological safety? Like, how are we doing as a team? Like, what is really going on? Are we seeing differences as assets? Are we throwing, like putting them down and trying to get everyone to conform to this one kind of group think? And yeah, I can send that over. I just think it's so important. I think of, I don't know if anyone, probably a lot of you have seen The Office, the TV show. I've been watching reruns right now because COVID. I'm like, what do I do? And I think in one of the episodes, they do a trust fall, I've never been in a trust fall. It looks kind of freaky to me, but they do the trust fall. I think of psychological safety as a psychological trust fall. You're like, I really want to say this important idea, and I think I should tell my boss, like, hey, you got to look out for this, but I'm scared. And so if you have the team and the team's got the manifesto and you're all there and you're going to get launched into this really safe psychological landing spot, you're going to speak up. And that's going to be the difference between innovation and creativity and belonging and inclusion to, groupthink and compliance and conformity. So.